I feel like I really understand that we have a responsibility to change the narrative around what we are delivering to young people in the class.
You ever notice how some royal stories do not explode all at once? They sort of creep in. Not with a palace statement, not with some dramatic announcement stamped with a crest and delivered by a man in very serious shoes. No, they start with the little things, the odd absence, the carefully timed appearance, the smile that looks right until you stare at it for 2 seconds too long and think, hold on, was that actually a happy smile or just a very well-trained one? And that is exactly why people have started looking more closely at Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mapelli. Because from the outside, this was supposed to be one of the quieter royal success stories. Less chaos, less scandal, less tabloid fireworks. A modern royal marriage with just enough elegance, just enough mystery, and just enough privacy to make people think, finally, here is one that might actually escape the curse. You know, the curse being that royal love stories always begin like a fairy tale and then somehow end with a documentary, an interview, or 1,000 newspaper columns screaming into the void. But lately, the whispers have changed. And to be clear, that is what they are, whispers, speculation, the kind of talk that always swirls around public figures, especially royals. Nothing confirmed by the couple. But still, royal watchers have been doing what royal watchers do best, which is reading between the lines so hard they practically need a magnifying glass and a cup of tea. Because after 5 years of marriage, people are starting to wonder whether this relationship is facing pressures far more serious than anyone first realized. And honestly, when you start peeling back the layers, this story gets very interesting, very fast. Think back to the summer of 2020. The whole world felt frozen, streets empty, airports silent, weddings canceled, plans shattered. Everybody was living through that strange, eerie period where even the simplest things felt uncertain. And right in the middle of all that, behind the old stone walls of Windsor, Princess Beatrice got married. Not in the giant, glittering, carriage-filled way royal weddings usually happen. No endless crowd shots, no cathedral packed with dignitaries, no huge balcony moment for the cameras. Instead, it was small, quiet, intimate, almost secretive. On July 17, 2020, Beatrice married Edoardo Mapelli at the Royal Chapel of All Saints. A tiny guest list, a private setting, a ceremony that felt less like a public state occasion and more like a family moment happening while the rest of the world held its breath. And at the time, people loved that about it. It felt romantic, grounded, almost refreshingly normal, which is not a word people usually get to use with royals unless they're talking about somebody wearing sneakers once. Beatrice wore a vintage dress borrowed from Queen Elizabeth II, beautifully altered, which added this lovely touch of continuity and family symbolism. The whole thing looked elegant in a way that did not need to scream for attention. But even then, if you were paying close attention, there were little details that made some people pause. The guest list was tiny, yes, because the world was in chaos. That part made sense. But royal watchers noticed who was and was not there. Certain absences raised eyebrows, not because absence automatically means drama, it does not, but because in royal life, every presence means something and every absence means people will talk for 6 business months minimum. Still, the wedding happened, the photos looked beautiful, the public moved on, the couple settled into married life. They appeared together, they welcomed their daughter Sienna. From the outside, the image held, calm, stable, modern, neat little royal package, ribbon-tied. But real life is rarely neat, especially not when titles, old family baggage, blended families, money, public scrutiny, and inherited scandal all get shoved into the same room and told to behave. And that is where this story starts to get messy. Because the whispers now are not really about one big dramatic event. They're about pressure, the slow kind, the kind that builds quietly while everybody's still posing for photographs, the kind that doesn't announce itself with a crash, but with distance, tension, fatigue, tiny cracks that keep getting papered over until one day people start wondering whether the wallpaper is holding the house together. Some reports and gossip pieces have suggested that Beatrice may have been under growing strain and that people around the royal orbit have noticed tension. Again, none of this is confirmed by the couple, but the reason this kind of story sticks is because it fits a pattern people have seen before. Royal marriages do not usually fall apart because of one bad Tuesday. They get squeezed from every direction until even ordinary issues start feeling enormous. And in Beatrice and Edoardo's case, there are a lot of directions. First, there's the blended family reality. Long before Beatrice became Edoardo's wife, he had already built a life with his former partner, Dara Haran. Together, they share a son, Wolfie. By all public appearances, everybody has tried to keep things respectful and child-focused. Wolfie has clearly been loved and included, and that matters. But let's be honest, blended families are complicated even when nobody is famous, nobody has a title, and nobody is being watched by half the internet with a hobby-level obsession for body language analysis. Now add royalty to that. Now add headlines every time a child appears in a photo. Now add the fact that the former partner is successful, visible, and still very much part of the parenting picture. That doesn't automatically mean conflict. It does mean complexity. Because co-parenting requires constant communication, schedules, holidays, birthdays, school decisions, family time, travel, everything. In a normal family, that's private. In a royal-adjacent family, normal things become storylines. Suddenly, people are interpreting basic parenting arrangements like they're decoding state secrets. Wolfie spends time here, people talk. Wolfie appears there, people talk. Beatrice smiles in public, people talk. Dara attends something, people talk. At some point, it must feel exhausting just existing while strangers narrate your emotional life like they wrote the script. And that kind of pressure does something. Even if everybody's mature, even if everybody's trying, even if no one is openly fighting, emotional complexity still has weight. Then there's Beatrice's own family history, which is not exactly light reading. Because no matter how carefully she presents herself, no matter how poised or gracious or quietly dignified she appears, the shadow of Prince Andrew's scandals has hung over her life for years. That's just reality. She didn't create that shadow, but she's had to live under it. Every appearance gets filtered through it. Every social event, every family gathering, every public photograph comes with that background noise. Imagine trying to build a stable private life while carrying public baggage you didn't pack yourself. That has to be draining, emotionally, socially, probably spiritually at this point. And it doesn't only affect Beatrice, it affects the marriage too. Because Edoardo is not just married to a woman, he's married into a family that exists under microscopic scrutiny. A family where one scandal from one person can splash onto everybody at the table, whether they like it or not. That kind of environment can turn ordinary stress into something much heavier. Then there's the question of lifestyle. Some talk has suggested that the couple's routines may involve time spent apart, with London on one side, countryside life on the other, and work demands constantly pulling in different directions. And again, plenty of couples manage distance. Distance alone doesn't equal disaster. But when you stack distance on top of public pressure, family controversy, co-parenting logistics, and the endless performance of appearing fine, it becomes easier to see how emotional space can widen without anyone meaning it for to. Because marriages are often built in the small things: breakfast conversations, running jokes, sharing exhaustion, being in the same room long enough to notice when the other person is not okay. When two people live under constant demands, those little connecting moments can start disappearing, not dramatically, quietly, and quiet distance is sometimes the hardest to detect until it's already there. What makes all of this even more fascinating is that their marriage began under such unusual conditions. That 2020 wedding now looks symbolic in a way people maybe didn't appreciate at the time. Back then, it seemed romantic because it was stripped down. But looking back, you can also ask whether a relationship formalized during such an abnormal global moment was always going to face a strange adjustment later. When the world is shut down, intimacy can feel intensified, decisions can feel urgent, everything feels emotionally sharper. Then normal life returns, or whatever passes for normal in royal circles, and suddenly the relationship has to survive not just romance, but routine. And routine is where the real test always lives. Also, let's not ignore the cultural angle here, because that matters more than people think. Edoardo comes from Italian aristocratic heritage. Beatrice comes from one of the most scrutinized royal institutions on earth. Those worlds overlap, sure, but they're not identical. Different expectations around privacy, family boundaries, public life, even what counts as normal social behavior. Small differences can stay small for a while, then stress hits, and suddenly those differences stop being charming and start becoming fault lines. One person may want more discretion, another may be used to a certain level of duty. One may seek retreat, the other may feel obligation. One may see public life as a nuisance, the other may see it as inherited reality. None of that means a marriage can't work. It just means compromise has to be real, constant, and sometimes exhausting. And when you zoom out, the bigger picture gets even darker. Because Beatrice and Edoardo, if they are struggling at all, wouldn't be the first royal couple to discover that love inside a monarchy comes with a built-in weather system. Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, Charles and Diana, Harry and Meghan, different people, different circumstances, obviously, but the same pattern keeps appearing. Public pressure magnifies private problems, duty competes with intimacy, family legacy crowds out personal freedom. Every